Welcome to Coleman Report Live. I'm Bob Coleman, and we're talking Main Street and the small business lenders who help it grow. Chris, thank you so much for joining us out of Florida. Lance, as always, good to see you. You're back in the saddle, Lance. You know, we kicked you out of the car.
Not in the car, Bob. Not going 80 down the interstate. So I'm back in the office.
And Katie, who's going stir crazy out of Washington. Welcome, Katie. She's smiling because she gets to see her family again. Hey, Chris, good to see you. I know life is crazy, but I appreciate you taking the time.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
We got a lot of stuff. Let's go into it. Number one, do you agree that SBA's biggest challenge is COVID stimulus fraud? Katie, where's this question coming from?
So the OIG has issued about 10 reports for their fall session. And within those 10 reports, they consistently have been saying that COVID stimulus management, especially fraud, is going to be one of their biggest challenges moving forward.
And the industry agrees with that. Chris, you have an opinion?
100% agree. I think we haven't seen the other shoe drop yet. It's coming.
Lance?
Bob, the first case of COVID stimulus fraud occurred in Arkansas. It was in the news. It was in the news today. A gentleman in Northwest Arkansas who worked with Walmart came up with some fictitious PPP applications.
No.
Imagine that.
No.
Wow.
Well, I know we will see something else. Full disclosure, we don't know what it's going to look like. We all are in agreement something will happen. And I know the fraud, there will be emphasis on to stop the headlines on the fraud. Number two, this is my question. Do you believe community advantage lenders should be under the same standards of review as a PPP lender? I'll tell you why I asked that, but I'll go to Chris first. Chris, what's your opinion about that?
Well, I don't think the review standards for PPP lenders were terribly strong, which is partly why we got so much fraud. I think community advantage lenders actually should be held to a higher standard, and I think that's important.
Where I'm going with this, Lance and Katie, is community advantage has a different mission than Chris's shop. Very much, well, their funding is for underserved markets. SBA defines underserved as military, as veterans, economic, women-owned, veteran-owned, and minority-owned. And these are also smaller loans. So should they be subject to the same benchmarks as Chris's house?
Well,
Bob, I think
question, though, Bob. I'm sorry, Lance, I didn't mean to interrupt you there.
Well, I agree with Chris. I don't know that a higher standard, but at least the same level of review is appropriate in this.
Good. All right. Are we stuck on the slide, guys? Or there we go. All right. Well, I'm in minority on that. I've always felt that there should be an incentive for these community advantage lenders not to get beat up as much.
Well, maybe there is, Bob, but I think you're comparing apples to oranges. I think the minimum standard for PPP lenders was pretty minimum, and I think if you're going to be making 7A loans going forward, then you need to think about the integrity of the agency and the programs, and therefore I think they need a slightly higher standard than what some of the PPP folks, the fintech bros and others that they let in to do PPP loans, and clearly they were very sloppy about how they administered the program.
Okay, very good. Lance, you were going to interject something?
Well, I agree with Chris. The standards, the requirements for a PPP lender were not very stringent to begin with. So, lowering the review standard, I mean, what are you going to say? Let's take a wheelbarrow full of money and go out to the corner and say, here, have some.
All right. Well, the conversation is different than I thought. But so I put words in your mouth that you advocate a higher standard for PPP, Chris? Is that what you're saying?
100%. In fact, I've been on record for a couple months now. I've written editorials about it. And if there's going to be a second draw of PPP, I really think there ought to be congressional investigations into some of how the PPP lenders actually process these loans. There was not the same standard from my shop and Lance's shop to many others that are out there, particularly the ones couldn't spell SBA before PPP came around. I think it's a concern, and I think Congress should be rightfully concerned about some of these things.
Very good.
Well,
Question number.
and a really simple thing, Bob, in processing a PPP loan. It blows my mind how many non-existent businesses got PPP loans when all it requires is pulling the institution pulling a certificate of good standing.
Yep. Very easy.
I mean, how did non-existent so
you can't
again,
automate that. You can't automate that, Lance, through technology. So there's your first clue.
So most of your regular SBA lenders pulled those certificates and did not have those issues.
That's right.
When was the last time SBA updated the SOP 5053 supervision and enforcement from the Office of Credit Risk Management, U.S. Small Business Administration? I'll give you a hint. It's more than 5 years. Lance, do you know the answer? Put you on the spot.
I do not know the answer, Bob, but I'm going to go 2010 since you said more. Well, they're all more than 5, but I'm going to go 2010.
I'm going to go
you're
2012.
wrong.
2012.
All right. Katie, who's right?
Chris is right. It's 2012.
There we go. That was a complete guess, by the way.
Well, that's okay. You and then 1/3 of everyone is there. The point is, it really doesn't make a difference. It's more than 5 years, more than 6 years.
Right.
Katie, what do we have here? What are they doing?
So yesterday, the SBA released an updated version of this SOP. The update includes, let me pull up the whole list here. It includes risk-based review protocols, more information on the methodology used for Paris scores and SMART, sales authority. It talks about lender oversight fees, and it lays out a corrective action process. So those are the new changes, and I believe we're talking about possibly even having a webinar on this to give everyone more in-depth information. Yeah,
the OCRM enforcement, they talk a lot about Paris. They talk about benchmarks, which I'm interested in very much on that. And Lance, you're going to do a webinar on this next Wednesday, week from tomorrow.
Sounds good. Exciting.
Good. Okay. What's going on in Washington, Katie?
So there's not too much of an update. However, there is still movement on that bipartisan bicameral framework that we heard about last week. They are still discussing that. Really, the problem right now they're saying is that December 11th deadline for the government shutdown. Obviously, they want to focus on that, so we don't have too much of a problem with that. Pelosi has suggested maybe combining those two bills and having the spending bill along with the relief bill. McConnell would really just prefer to create a stopgap measure and then focus on the on the relief bill next week. But we will see there is a deadline there, so they do have to be really focusing on this, and we are still hearing that they are still addressing this issue.
Very good. Chris, they're going to pass a continuing resolution, right?
I think so.
They don't have a choice.
I would be stunned if they didn't. Yeah.
And what do you, Katie, I guess, when's the next shoe going to drop? When do you have any, first of all, I always ask the same question. This is a bipartisan situation, correct? There's no one that's coming out against it.
And it's gaining even more bipartisan support. We're hearing more and more people jump on this bipartisan bicameral framework is what it's just being called right now. But that's including PPP. It's also including some other things. But we're hearing more and more support for that, especially since they've kind of selected a number that was between what the Democrats were proposing and what the Republicans were proposing, so they can all kind of agree on it. Of course, somebody has to go down a step, somebody has to go up a step, but they are in more agreement now. So that is very positive.
The numbers.
We are going to know that they are saying before the end of the year, so that's a little bit further out than we would like to hear, but at least they're still talking about this.
I mean, the numbers are still amazing, Lance. Trillions of dollars, talking about another $300 billion for PPP. I mean, it's obviously needed with the second wave. and there is very little dissent in terms of deficit hawks on this conversation, guys.
I mean, the nice thing about it is a lot of the money we're talking about is already there. I mean, a lot of the PPP money they're talking about was unused money from the second round.
Right.
Chris, this is sort of obscure, but I think it's important to some people. What's going on with PPPLF, where I know you're involved with this, where you're able to access Fed funds as a non-bank lender? Tell us about that process and what's going on with that.
Last Monday, the Fed extended the PPPLF. It was supposed to expire at the end of this year, 12/31, and it's been extended to 3/31 of next year, which will allow a lot of PPP lenders access to that facility. And a lot of the buying and selling of PPP loans is through utilizing that facility. The only problem, I mean, it shows great flexibility from the Fed, and we have great relations with those folks, and they're doing a great job. But the only problem is we have this tiny little issue of whether the accounting profession is going to let PPP lenders recognize the processing fees in the calendar year we're in or not. And I'm going to say they're probably not, unless there is some sort of an exit, like someone selling their PPP loans between now and the end of the year. So I guess I would say, Bob, I don't think it's going to make a huge difference, but people that are sellers of PPP loans, they need to get off the fence. They need to make this decision quickly and probably within the next 7 to 10 days if they expect it to settle by year end and actually show that revenue recognition this calendar year.
Chris, what's the issue with the accounting from the lenders that the transaction is not complete? Why are we at that point?
Well, my CFO is having a conversation right now with our external auditors about this very thing, but I think it basically comes down to because you're not allowed to make an assumption about 100% forgiveness. Therefore, and these loans have anywhere from 2 to 5 year terms on them, depending on when they were actually closed. You technically should be recognizing. Yes, exactly. You should be accruing the processing fees, even though the work was done, and that would be my argument. But you technically should be accruing the fees over the life of these loans. And the only time you can accelerate that, of course, is if you don't have the loan anymore, meaning like you sold the loan, for instance, or the loan was completely forgiven. And in those cases, sure, you can accelerate those accruals and recognize the revenue. But barring that, you're going to have to spread this over probably multiple calendar years, which is, for a lot of PPP lenders, I'm sure people have thought about this, but this means that, they may have already booked some of this revenue and profits for this year, and now they're going to have to end up deferring some of this into 21 and maybe beyond, depending on when the loan is closed. So it could mess up some people's financials between now and year end if they don't otherwise get things forgiven or sell these loans.
Do you think that'll happen?
I'm in deep discussions with a couple parties to sell their loans to us, and I've basically given them the week to 10 days to hustle up because I don't particularly want to be working on New Year's Eve trying to get these things done. I don't think too many people at the Fed want to be doing that either, and I don't know. We'll see. I have a hunch it's probably not going to happen as much as I think it ought to.
Any wild cards in this PPP conversation, Katie, Lance, and Chris? What I mean by that is, can something come out of left field? Like I've always been a fan of the first mortgage loan program for guaranteeing 504s. Right. Do you see anything coming down, or is the final legislation going to look like everything we've been talking about in terms of another round of PPP? It looks like there's not going to be unemployment. I mean, what do you see? What do you see?
I think it's going to be similar to what we've been hearing all along. I don't think there's going to be too many wild cards here. FMLP, I mean, I was talking to Senate Small Business Committee staff just last week, and actually I brought it up, and they said, we haven't hardly heard anything about that. And it's certainly not in any of the proposals, which is unfortunate. But, I think people have, crystallized around that $150,000 mark of simplified forgiveness. I do think that's probably got a pretty high chance of happening. It seems like a lot of our discussions over the last several months about demonstrating revenue recognition. Remember the early proposals was you had to show 50% revenue reduction. I think everything has seemed to coalesce around, say, a 25% or more revenue reduction, which means it'll be able to help, the second draw PPP will be able to help more small business owners. But other than that, I think everything is pretty much what the proposals have been up to this point, unless somebody knows otherwise. But that's pretty much what I've been hearing.
Speculating on increased guarantee percentages or waiving of fees, Lance, Chris?
I've heard a lot of talk about increased guarantee percentages, and of course it'd be a great thing for regular 7A lending, but I've not seen anything in the legislation in regards to that.
Yeah, I mean, we just don't know.
I think it'll be in future legislation sometime next calendar year, Bob. Hopefully early next calendar year.
Katie, any additional thoughts? Anything that?
No, I pretty much just what Lance was saying. Like, we have heard some mention of increased guarantees, especially for 7A. But that doesn't sound like it's probably going to be part of this relief bill. I think it's probably going to be later on if they do pass it.
Right.
A couple things. I don't think we have a slide, Joseph. Let's make sure we do it tomorrow. Congratulations, Dorothy Thomas, our Coleman Main Street Lender of the Year. We released that yesterday. Today we have the SBA Woman of the Year. When's that being released?
I believe that comes out at 1.
At 1. So we will hold off on that, but we'll get their pictures up for tomorrow. So congratulations to those 2 winners. Comment on verifying operators. They say in our state, we cannot, sole proprietors do not have to file a DBA. However, there are ways to verify business that is not registered with the state, such as web searches, Facebook, licenses, etc. We finished up our agenda for our secondary market. Please take advantage of that. This is the only event that specializes in the secondary market. Chris, I think we have you talking. There you are on this. You're talking about 7A market, and you're going to bring us up to date and much more analytical. This is something your CFO should get into and really helps in terms of your budgeting for 2021, which we are all waiting to happen quickly.
We're ready.
We're ready for 2020 to be over, in other words, is what you're saying. Yes.
Lance is going to do his PPP Forgiveness webinar tomorrow. And like I said, we're going to announce the supervision and enforcement SOP. Gentlemen, thank you for your time. Katie, thank you for your time. Talk to you tomorrow. And thank you for joining us for Coleman Report Live and for supporting America's Main Street, one entrepreneur at a time.
Have a great day.
Have a great afternoon.
Take care, everybody.